Rosie the storyteller. One day at Hilltop Yards, both Rosie and 87546 were there, spending time off after their hard work. Rosie, ever since we became best friends, I would like to know how you joined the Northwestern, said 87546. All right, I'll tell you since it's our day off, puffed Rosie, and this is how it went. Before I came to the Northwestern Railway, I was a hush-hush from the Davenport Works. Then I was sold to somewhere called the South Sodor Railway, I said. I was good friends with 3 of the engines. Their names were Jason, a blue tank engine from the LMS, along with Randy, a green tank engine, and Max, a teal tender engine, both from the LNER, I said. Another good friend I had was an orange LNER engine named Cassie. She and I were very close friends, I said. There was also a rude GWR 14XX tank engine named Zach. He was painted black, and he was as nasty as Alfred. I puffed. Sometimes Jason, Randy, Max, and Cassie would tell me about Thomas and how hard he works, I said. One day, I unintentionally derailed a freight car on my way up to the quarry, I said. At that moment, Zach came in with his passenger train. Ha! You should think twice before derailing that freight car, you lavender jinx, he said. I began to cry at what he told me. Then, Jason arrived with his passenger train. You're being a brute with poor Rosie. Call yourself an engine? You're nothing but a disgrace to this railway. Just wait until our controller finds out, he said. Humph, said Zach. I don't care, as long as Rosie gets scolded for this, said Zach. Soon, Sir Bob Jackson, the controller of the South Sodor Railway, spoke sternly to Zach. Just because one of your fellow engines had an accident doesn't mean you make fun of them, he said. Now, you're disrupting traffic on this railway. At the end of the day, Cassie took me to the sheds. Zach, you will stay in your shed until I'm confident to trust you again, said Sir Bob Jackson. That made my day, I said. When the other engines came back to the shed, they found Zach's predicament funny, I said. Zach is staying in his shed for being mean, said Randy. You got that right, puffed Max. We would often rent an engine during busy periods, and his name was Harley, I said. One day, me and Jason were shunting cars at the coal mine, ready for Cassie to take, I puffed. When he and I were leaving, the cars were being filled up with coal. Then, Cassie came to collect the cars, I said. I know that despite our quarrels with Zach, we worked happily together for many years, I said. Hard times came. The mines closed, I said. Our freight was being taken over by lorries. Later, the line to the quarries closed, I said. What's going on? Said Randy. You have seen what is happening, said Sir Bob Jackson. We've been losing freight and passengers to buses and lorries, and I have bad news for all of you. I know bad news is not good, but it's worth hearing, said Max. This is how I'll summarize it. The South Sodor Railway will be closing down, said Sir Bob Jackson. The freight and passengers taking the roads is the reason why we've been losing money as quick as a cat. Therefore, it's pointless to keep operating, he said. Oh, I loved working with you on this railway, and I've been a proud dad treating you engines like my children, Sir Bob Jackson said. But I'm sure you all will be in good new hands. Then he left. Closed? Said Max. How am I supposed to feel? You should feel upset and refuse to leave, said Zach. Stop that, said Jason. Sure, you can be upset, but that is no reason to act like a 3-year-old. I sure will miss this place, I said. I agree, puffed Cassie. Later, Sir Bob Jackson came with another person, Sir Topham Hatt from the Northwestern Railway. My railway is suffering from a backlog with shunting, so I'll take Rosie, he said. Very well, said Sir Bob Jackson. We're signing some paperwork, and they left. I didn't ever want to say goodbye to the engines, I said, but I had to. I'll miss you most, said Cassie. Later, Sir Topham Hatt returned, feeling very happy, I said. Sir Bob Jackson has agreed to let me purchase you for my railway, he said. Thank you, sir, I replied. Do us proud, said Cassie, Randy, Jason, and Max. Now I'm happy as I can be. I worked hard since my first day, I said. I copied Thomas when I first saw him because I wanted to be like him. That made him cross. He soon gained my trust, and me and him are currently good friends. And that, 87546, is the whole story, puffed Rosie. Did you like it? Yes, but I didn't like the part where your old railway went down the drain, said 87546. Well, that part I agree with you on, said Rosie. At least on my old railway, we've always had each other. The same applies on this railway, puffed Rosie. Oh, you're a good best friend, said 87546. This made Rosie so happy her axles tingled. A new friend on the Skarloey Railway. Summer is always busy on Sodor, and the engines don't mind the extra work. This puts a strain on them, and that's when new engines are brought to help out. Later, to Mr. Percival came to see both engines. I understand you both have been struggling occasionally with your trains. So how should we settle this? He asked. How about another engine here to help us? Added Sir Handel. I'll think about it, replied Mr. Percival. He came back minutes later. Of course, let's have another engine to help you guys. I will help with the recovery team while the other engines do their usual work, he said. Whoever it is, you will make him or her feel welcome, said Mr. Percival as he left. Jock was taking the recovery team down the line. Let's explore any abandoned area on the old Midsodor, said one of the workers. The explorers split up in all sorts of directions. They found the back of the old mining shed, which was covered in rocks. Hello, what's your name? Asked Mr. Percival after he pulled away two of them. Name's Stanley, he said quietly. Are you sad? Asked Mr. Percival. Stupid manager took away my wheels and turned me into a pumping engine. And I've heard that he's been dead for a while because of Albert running his train off the tracks. And now I feel silly for what I did, and I want to be really useful. He said, Where's Smudger? He works on my railway. If you want another chance, that's what you'll get, said Mr. Percival. After the other rescuers came, Stanley was put onto an off-road truck and driven away from where he was found. They saw the off-road truck with Stanley on its flatbed come. Let's load him up, said Mr. Percival, and that is what they did. Jock puffed carefully in reverse back to Arlesdale Station. Percy shunted Stanley into the works. Don't worry, he said. You will find yourself really useful. Stanley looked down at himself in shame. After Stanley was turned back into an engine, this time Georgie came to pick him up. I'm sure you won't derail this time around, she said sweetly, although she was anxious deep down. When they got to the transfer yards, Stanley was lifted onto the narrow-gauge rails by a crane. After Stanley said thank you to Georgie, she left. Then, his fire was burning nicely, and Stanley had a good head of steam. Sir Handel and Smudger were the first to meet Stanley, the new engine. Ugh, you came back? Said Sir Handel. Oh, my old friend. Glad to see you back, puffed Smudger. You and Stanley were friends? Said Sir Handel. Yes, me and him go back to our time on the good old Midsodor Railway, puffed Stanley. Later, Mr. Percival came to see Stanley. I want you to take some straw to the transfer yards, he said. Ah, yes, work to do, Stanley puffed. For the rest of the day, Stanley worked hard. On the way to the transfer yards, he didn't derail. That's the hay I was told to collect here, said Gillen. Who are you? He asked. The name's Stanley. I'm the new engine for the Skarloey Railway, he said. Luke was another engine to meet Stanley "Hello," he said. "Hi there," Stanley replied. "So, you were once bad, but have since changed your ways?" said Luke. "Yes," puffed Stanley, "just like that 87546 filler," he said. "How do you know about him?" Luke asked curiously. "Percy told me about him on my way to the works," Stanley replied. Stanley shunted the slate cars at the inclined railway. After they went up, he went off to find work to do. Meanwhile, Luke continued down the line with his train when suddenly... "Help!" he screamed as he was dangling on the cliff. Stanley's driver ran up to Stanley and Duncan. "Luke is off the line. One of you, go help him," he said. "Are you kidding me? I'm not rescuing that stupid fat boiler," said Duncan. "Hang on, I'm coming," said Stanley as he left. Luke looked down in panic at the bottom of the cliff. "If I roll over, tell Mr. Percival that I loved working on the railway," he said. "Oh, you'll get out of this somehow," said Luke's driver. Just then, Stanley puffed in. "Oh, I'm here. Everything will be okay," he puffed. "Oh, good," puffed Luke. "I'm glad it's you and not that grouchy Duncan who will help me," he added. Then, Stanley was coupled up to Luke's coaches, and he began to pull. With every wheel turn, he pulled Luke back onto firm rails. "Thank you," puffed Luke. "You're always welcome," puffed Stanley. Then, Luke's driver came out. "There's bad weather ahead. Luke's passengers are waiting, and his tubes are ruptured," he said. "Stanley, do you think you can?" he asked. "I'll try, as a way to be helpful," said Stanley. "That's a good engine," Luke replied. Stanley pushed the train down the line. The wind was howling like that in a storm, but Stanley kept trying nonetheless. The train charged at the wind with much ferocity. "We must pull together, just like in the States," Stanley puffed. Despite their struggles, they made it to the station at last. "Well, Stanley, you weren't the same engine you were on the MSR," said Sir Handel. "I was surprised to find out you did change your ways. And another thing, I'm sorry I sounded judgmental," said Sir Handel. "You're all right," puffed Stanley. Later, Mr. Percival came to see Stanley. As a reward for your bravery, I think you should take the next puppet show special," he said. "Thank you," puffed Stanley. "Also, would you like to join my railway?" Mr. Percival added. "Oh, yes," Stanley puffed. Stanley is now good friends with the other engines, and, like Smudger, has since learned his lesson. And he is always happy to help those in need. I think he wants to make new friends, don't you? Chrstmas for Billy. was December on Sodor, and the engines on the Little Western were planning a celebration. "I'm so excited for Christmas," said Billy. "Aye, you sure are," said Douglas. "I can't wait for the celebration that my best friend Oliver has planned," said Billy. "Well, that's nice. We're having a celebration here. We're going to tell Sir Topham Hatt about this," Oliver said. And so it was arranged. Yes, Thomas will pick up the celebration supplies from the transfer yards. Plus, Mr. Percival has told his Stanley to take them to Thomas. The Little Western engines were excited. Thomas was waiting at the transfer yards, waiting for Stanley to come. And then he did. "Sorry I'm late. A herd of cows came onto the line," Stanley chuffed. "It's all right," puffed Thomas. Soon, the decorations were loaded onto 3 of Thomas's freight cars, and he puffed off. Later, as the snow came down, Thomas had broke down. "Oh, my pistons have frozen because of this weather," he puffed. As Billy and Oliver were getting ready for work, Sir Topham Hatt came to see them. "Thomas has broken down, and I need you two to take him here, and after the Christmas decorations are put up, Thomas will be taken to the works by Duck," he said. Billy and Oliver then coupled up to Thomas. "Are you ready?" said Oliver. "Ready as I'll ever be," Billy replied. Then the 2 engines went down the line. Then they puffed down the line. They puffed down the line. "We'll get through this somehow," puffed Billy. The cavalcade continued on. At last, they reached the engine sheds on the Little Western. "We made it," puffed Billy. Soon after, Duck, Donald, and Douglas came back. "This is very good," said Douglas. "Agreed," replied Duck. "Merry Christmas to all who help me on my branch line," puffed Duck. "This is what Christmas is, a time to be together," puffed Billy. And so, those who worked on the Little Western partied all the rest of the day. Smudger's new friends. friendly engine, and he's also kind. One day, he met Fearless Freddy. "Hello, what's your name?" he asked. "My name is Smudger," he said. "What's yours?" "I'm Fearless Freddy," he replied. "We're pleased to meet each other." So, what has been going on lately?" he asked. "Recently," puffed Smudger, "we did get a new engine. His name is Stanley." Freddy was amazed. Later, Mr. Percival arrived. "Smudger, I want you to take some cars of stone up to the transfer yards." So that is what Smudger did. Meanwhile, Smudger was working hard. "This is great," he chuffed. Later, Smudger met Percy at the transfer yards. "I did not expect to see you here," puffed Percy. "I'm Smudger, and what is your name?" he asked. "I'm Percy," he said. "It's nice to meet you," he chuffed. Soon, the stones were in Percy's freight cars, and after he left, Smudger went down to the stone quarry. Smudger shunted the cars to the incline, and then he left. But as Smudger left to collect his coaches, the troublesome trucks broke free from the winch. "We've broke off. Chase him. Bash him," they said. They continued to chase Smudger down the line. The cars caught up to Smudger and forced him off the tracks. He fell in the middle of a road, dazed and surprised. At the transfer yards, Mr. Percival came to see Stanley and Freddy. Smudger is off the line, and he needs help. The two engines set off to help him at once. Smudger was worried. The crash brought some bad memories back to him. Freddy came with the breakdown train, while Stanley took away the cars. Then, they took Smudger to the transfer yards. After Freddy pushed and Stanley pulled Smudger to the transfer yards, Mr. Percival wasn't happy about what had happened. "I'm sorry, but you'll have to go to the works," he said. As Smudger was shunted into the works, Percy felt bad for him. "You'll be okay. The workers are nice. The workers here are nice." And he left. Later, Smudger was repaired, and Percy came back for him. He then took Smudger away. Smudger and Percy talked about the old Mid-Sodor Railway, Albert's fatal crash, and the ghost of the MSR manager moving on after he was forgiven. Later, Percy brought Smudger back to the transfer yards, where he was to be put back on the narrow gauge rails. "Thank you," puffed Smudger. "You're welcome," puffed Percy. Percy left after Smudger said goodbye to him, and then Smudger set off to the wharf. The 4 Mid-Sodor veterans were waiting for Smudger. Freddy came in. "Here's a surprise for you," he said. The surprise in question was Smudger. "Good to see you," said Peter, Sam, and Sir Handel. friend, said Stanley. Well, it's nice to have you back, puffed Duke. Smudger felt very happy that he made friends with Percy and fearless Freddy.
Now that possibly